Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? The August 27, 2024 meeting of the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability is called to order at 6:30 p.m. We begin with the call of the roll. Commissioner Driver is present. Commissioner Gottlieb.
Present.
Commissioner Terry. Commissioner Minor. Commissioner Presley.
Present.
Commissioner Wortham. With 4 out of 6 members of the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability present, we have a quorum and we can conduct the commission's business. The next item of business is public comment. If you would like to share something related to the commission's work on public safety and accountability, you have a few options. You can speak at a public meeting. You can also submit your public comment in writing by emailing your comment to communitycommissionpubliccomment@cityofchicago.org, or you can bring a copy of your comment to one of the commission's public meetings and give it to someone on the commission or someone on the commission staff. People who wanted to speak during public comment period tonight were asked to submit their names in advance. Names were then drawn at random by a member of the commission staff. Speakers will be called in the order in which their names are drawn. If your name is called to offer public comment, we ask that you approach the microphone and line up in the order in which your name is called. When it is your turn to speak, please say your name and then spell your name and then offer your comments. Each speaker will have up to 2 minutes. We have allotted a total of 30 minutes for public comment. Our first speaker is virtual, and it is Humberto Maldonado. Not here. Elise Edwards, District Council Member Elise Edwards.
Can you hear me? Good
here?
afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Hello?
Should we keep going? Somebody from,
Hello?
she's going to speak?
Can y'all hear me? Hello?
Hello.
Hello, Elise.
Oh, you can hear me? Because I've been speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my
Yes.
name is Elise Edwards. I am Elise Edwards, A-L-E-E-S, last name E-D-W-A-R-D-S. I'm a district counselor in the 11th Police District, and I am giving public comment in support of stopping the pretextual traffic stops in my district. We have the largest number of pretextual traffic stops. And as I am going into the community, having conversations with some of my community members, they're always commenting about some of the negative experiences that they've had with, the Chicago Police Department. And the majority of this is with traffic stops. And I can say that there was at least one experience that we had with someone that we actually knew that was a family member of one of the pillars in our community. And not only was this individual who has a, outstanding, reputation within the community, has a job as a construction worker, was stopped in front of his home and was given, I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
He was stopped in front of his home and was given a ticket for having his car lights on while the street lights were on. He was harassed by Chicago Police Department because he was afraid to get out of his car as a young Black male. They called other officers. They were threatening to, break his window and drag him out of the car. He did end up getting out. They tossed his car, which was an illegal search that they did, to his glove compartment box. It was a very traumatic experience for him, for his parents, his mother, his father, and his sister. His sister actually witnessed it and taped some of it. And so for this reason alone, I do know that sometimes traffic stops are needed. But when it is being used disproportionately in underserved communities for, I would say, no purpose, no reason, no cause, there's a lot of trauma that happens to community members, and it sometimes ends deadly. And so for that reason alone,
Thank you, Elise. That is time. Our next speaker is Ali Longbottom. I'm gonna call you in groups of 3 so you can line up and it'll help move the process a little faster. So first speaker, Ali Longbottom. Second is Dominic Amato. And the third is Alderman Daniel Espada.
Hi, my name is Ali Longbottom, ALILONGBOTTOM. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name's Ali. I'm here with Chicago Appleseed Center for Fair Courts to address the critical issue of pretextual traffic stops and to emphasize the role of the CCPSA in representing our community's priorities. First and foremost, we must end racially biased pretextual traffic stops through long-standing policy reform. These stops disproportionately target marginalized communities, eroding trust between the public and the police. The data is clear that this practice does not enhance public safety, but instead perpetuates systemic injustice. CCPSA has a unique opportunity to lead the charge in ending this harmful practice. Any policy implemented must be comprehensive. We can't afford half measures that allow the police to pivot to similar practices under a different name. We need a policy that outright ends pretextual stops, limits stops for low-level offenses that do not present road safety dangers, and ends suspicionless searches during traffic stops. Over half of traffic stops CPD made from 2019 to 2021 were for having a headlight or taillight issue or improperly displayed or expired registration plates. Stopping someone for these issues is more likely to create a dangerous scenario for them as they interact with police than to improve road safety. Consent searches also enable cops to conduct fishing expeditions of people and have very racially disparate enforcement. Law enforcement needs to have an independent legal basis to search before asking for consent. CCPSA is entering closed-door negotiations on these issues, despite being created to be the voice of the people on matters of public safety and policing. We expect transparency on how these conversations are progressing, and we trust that CCPSA will advocate for policies that align with the community's demand for accountability, transparency, and true public safety. In conclusion, the problem of pretextual traffic stops is extensive and requires strong, swift action. The CCPSA has the power to make meaningful change, and we urge CCPSA to use—
That's time. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dominic Amato, and I am the co-chair of the transportation group for the Chicago chapter of Sierra Club. As part of our work towards ending traffic violence in the city, we also believe that enforcement needs reform in a way that leads to safer, more equitable outcomes for all the citizens who live here. We believe police should not be responsible for enforcing minor violations. In 2023, 70% of traffic stops occurred either due to expired tags or burnt out light. Does that sound like a useful, good use of police resources? That also does not include data from 200,000 unreported stops, nearly a quarter of all stops that was recently unearthed by investigations from the outlet Injustice Watch. Or how about the 9/11 rapid response teams that were too busy pulling people over for minor offenses instead of responding to emergency calls? How can we justify the use of such police force for such colossal waste? Chicago also lags in homicide closure rates compared to the nation at large. Using loose pretexts to search for weapons hasn't fixed that and has only widened the gulf of mistrust between the people and the police. Imagine if we use some of those wasted resources for solving crimes by doing actual investigative work. Maybe we could make meaningful progress in addressing violent crime in the city. Police shouldn't be involved with traffic enforcement because to address these problems, we can do so without active policing. Sorry. It's no secret people of color, and especially Black Chicagoans, are unfairly targeted by law enforcement, whether human or machine, and buried under punitive fines that leave them having to risk jail time for minor infractions that lead to unpaid tickets. We punish poor people for being poor, as if that's a fault of their own, rather than unequal investment in their well-being. I don't want someone to go to jail because they couldn't afford to fix their taillight, but need a car because they live in a food and transit desert. I want the city to do a better job of making that a choice no one should ever have to make.
Time. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, commissioners. My name is Daniel Espada. I represent the First Ward as alderperson here in the city of Chicago. I also chair the Committee on Pedestrian and Traffic Safety for the City Council. What brings me here today is the opportunity to work with you on following up on a hearing that we actually had in my committee a year ago in collaboration with a lot of the individuals in the room this evening, in collaboration with the Free to Move Coalition, knowing that this is an issue that is directly related to your work. When we see the way traffic stops operate in the city of Chicago, those who gave public comment in my committee just about a year ago shared how that fractured their trust with the Chicago Police Department, how it gave them traumas that persisted in their lives. That is a work, that is a relationship with the Chicago Police Department that we can't afford for Chicagoans, particularly for Black and brown Chicagoans. I'm a Chicagoan who has lived in this city for 25 years now, this August, who has never been pulled over by the Chicago Police Department. Contrast that with my colleagues in the room, Black, Latinx, Asian American alders, who all that day had stories of pretextual traffic stops that impacted their lives. And not stories of their youth, of recklessness in the past, stories from their adulthood, stories of traffic stops from their time in office. I was really grateful last term to have an opportunity to vote for the creation of this commission. I am glad that we voted to create one of the most powerful bodies for police accountability in the United States. And I trust and believe and am encouraged by this hearing, and that you use the full power of your authority to create meaningful and lasting reform where traffic stops are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next three speakers are Alexandra Block, David Orlikoff, and Kyle Lucas.
Good evening, commissioners and members of the public. My name is Alexandra Block. I am the director of the Criminal Legal System and Policing Project at the ACLU of Illinois. And I have the honor of representing the plaintiffs in Wilkins versus City of Chicago, which is a proposed class action lawsuit against the City of Chicago based on the discrimination that our clients and hundreds of thousands of other Black and Latinx clients face based on CPD's pretextual traffic stop program. It's beyond dispute that CPD's mass traffic stop program has disproportionately affected Black and brown drivers throughout the city for years. What's less well understood, but very important to examine, is what are the policies and practices that CPD employs that cause the racially disparate effects that everyone here today and for years has been complaining about. And our investigation has shown that there are quotas that require police officers to stop certain numbers of drivers in a day or in a week or in a year. And those quotas incentivize officers to make baseless, unconstitutional, unlawful, and discriminatory traffic stops. The third is saturation policing, sending police disproportionately into Black and brown neighborhoods. And the third is simply racial profiling. It's important to understand why these disparate impacts are occurring to understand what to do about them. And we encourage CCPSA to look not only into solutions, but into causes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is David Orlikoff. I am a lifelong Chicagoan and an elected 14th District Councilor, working to achieve greater community control over police in beautiful Humboldt Park, where I live, as well as Logan Square, Wicker Park, and surrounding areas. We held a survey that shows constituents overwhelmingly want police to spend their time answering 911 calls and responding to emergency situations, and conducting traffic stops is their lowest priority alongside non-emergency activity. The biggest disconnect between the people's priorities and CPD's practices is around pretextual traffic stops, a discriminatory and dishonest replacement for the federally banned stop and frisk practice. Pretextual traffic stops are as wasteful for Chicago's taxpayers as they are harmful to the Black and brown communities that are receiving over 97% of all associated use of force. There is a real frustration that police are not responding to over half of 911 calls as reported by the Inspector General of Chicago, and are instead violating constitutional and civil rights through a systematic top-down practice that closely resembles racist quotas. I am also here today to mark a momentous, first-of-its-kind historical event. 35 district councilors representing millions of Chicagoans across the city have officially joined a DC proposal group calling for the passing of Freedom Move's three-point policy platform to end pretextual traffic stops by limiting low-level stops, banning suspicionless consent searches without probable cause, and ending the use of stops as an excuse for unrelated motivations. This is the first and only time in history that a majority of district councilors have come to a clear policy consensus, revealing that ending pretextual stops is the #1 issue for public safety in Chicago. Solving this problem is exactly why the CCPSA was created, and the following elected district councilors will not rest until Freedom Move's policy platform is fully enacted, ending pretextual stops for good. Alexander Perez, District 2, Anthony Bryant, Kenya Franklin, District 3, Levy Bernard, Gloria Jenkins, Brenda Waters, District 4, Robert McKay, Panchita Moore, District 5, David Boykin, District 6, Teresa Chandler, District 7, Aaron Vogel, District 9, Keisha Smith, Rosemary Dominguez, Eliana Bahena, District 10, Elise Edwards, District 11, Michelle Page, Leonardo Quintero, Chloe Vitale, District 12. Thank you. There's other names.
Hi there. My name is Kyle Lucas. I'm the executive director of Better Streets Chicago. We are a grassroots organization fighting for safer streets for all Chicagoans, and we are a proud member of the Freedom Move Coalition that's fighting to end pretextual traffic stops. I am a victim of traffic violence. In the last year, I have been hit 3 times while riding my bicycle in the city of Chicago. Every single time that I was hit, the police never came when I called. Last year, I heard a crash outside of my window one night. Me and the neighbor rushed out to see what was going on, and we found a car with a mother and 5 children. And their father was running around trying to play police officer, getting footage from any businesses around the area, because when we called 911, police never showed. Me and my neighbor waited around with the family while the mother was taken to the hospital, but the police never came. And this is really striking to me as we hear all these stories about people who have so much police intervention in their lives, from small infractions, getting pulled over for a broken taillight, for example. But then when people are actually facing crisis and need help, they're left alone. And this is, I think, the stark contrast that really highlights why it's so important that we actually change this policy, because this policy is having a dramatic negative impact on Black and brown Chicagoans' lives. But people who really need help aren't getting the help that they need when they need it. So I urge you to adopt the Freedom Move Coalition's 3-pronged platform and end this injustice. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next 3 speakers are David Boykin, Lee Bilecki, and Beth Roxford. Also, for the purposes of quorum, all 6 commissioners are now present. Commissioner Terry and Commissioner Minor are now present.
Lee Bilecki. David says he's not going to speak, so Lee Bilecki, Bieleckii, District Councilor for the CCPSA in the 22nd District. I know there's going to be a lot of talk about how the traffic stops affect people in the marginalized communities. They do. They affect them. They affect them to the tune of Chicago police in the last 2.5 years recovering over over 10,000 guns on traffic stops. It was last week I witnessed a video of a young man coming out of a convenience store in Chicago and Laramie when a car pulled up. And as he was coming out the door, two men jumped out, one with a handgun and another with an AK-47, and shot him dead. Would his life been saved by a traffic stop? I can't say. I do think there is a better way to conduct traffic stops. As one of the few people probably in this room that's ever had conducted traffic stops since I was a Chicago police officer for 27 years, I can tell you they're very dangerous. They're very traumatic. I still remember when Ella French was across the street in the hospital after she was shot and murdered on a traffic stop. So, and the hundreds of police officers that stood outside there. I think there is a better way. Hopefully, Alderman LaSpada and the city council could come to some resolution to help Chicago police officers in conducting traffic stops. LA County is investigating and made to create a study on civilians who can perform low-level traffic stops. It'd be interesting to see how that survey comes out. But the trauma caused by violence in the marginalized communities far outweighs the trauma from a traffic stop. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth, traditional spelling Rochford, R-O-C-H-F-O-R-D, and I'm a 17th district counselor. I am not a prognosticator, but allow me to fast forward to some of what we will hear tonight. Traffic stops are coming down, but what I would like to know is why did they increase so drastically when stop and frisk as a harassment technique was obviously in peril? Superintendent Snelling was not in charge, but he was part of the leadership and should have access to this information. Why is Chicago the only major city who has seen a dramatic increase in traffic stops since the COVID era? A New York Times journalist recently stated, Chicago broke our scale, while other cities are consistently decreasing in traffic stops. Now let me move to the future. We want pretextual traffic stops gone. We live in a city with significant violence problems. Police need to extract themselves from the ticket business. You need to be in the solving crimes and finding an actual effective way of getting guns off the street business. As in South Africa, there would be no reconciliation without truth. We need CPD to acknowledge the real harm their policies and practices have caused, and they need to partner with us to begin the healing process. Thank you.
Our next three speakers are Patricia Jimba, Dale Dacres, and Omar Dacres.
Patricia Jemba on behalf of the Cook County Law Office. I am the Director of Legislative and External Affairs at the Cook County Public Defender's Office. I'm here because Chicago police practices impact the majority of the 70,000 cases we represent clients in annually. The Cook County Public Defender's Office stands next and for Chicago. Officers target and wait for these drivers to commit minor traffic offenses or outright fabricate violations as justification to pull them over. These stops are not only constitutional violations, but also the gateway to criminal charges inflicting a lifetime of collateral consequences. Our attorneys review tens of thousands of hours of body-worn camera footage. Drivers and passengers are harassed, bullied, taunted, and pulled out of their vehicles in the most violent and humiliating of ways. The Sun Times reported that the 5 officers involved in Dexter Reed's shooting death, conducted 50 traffic stops in 3 days between March 19th to the 21st, including 8 that were made within the roughly 3 hours before the deadly encounter. None of these 50 stops addressed actual threats to community safety, but all of them harassed drivers and served as fishing expeditions. Many of our clients mistakenly believe that having a valid FOID card alone allows them to legally possess a firearm. When CBD finds a gun in the car, they arrest drivers and even passengers who would otherwise be law-abiding gun-carrying citizens, but for a lack of their concealed carry license. Begins then the criminal prosecution that leads to jobs and housing loss, pretrial appointments, and conflict with work, childcare, and educational commitments. Without oversight, CPD lacks the ability to curb these oppressive practices. We urge CCPSA to listen to the community and involve them in.
Time, thank you.
Everybody, I'm Darrell Dakers, Violence Prevention Program Manager for One Northside Violence Prevention Program, CP4P, also District Council for the 20th District. Now, I've experienced from early in stages of traffic stops when it was stop and frisk transform into this pretextual thing. Started when I was about 12, being harassed, bullied by police in my own community. And I seen that transition into my participants, the same people that I work with, being pulled over, harassed, speakers pulled out their car, parts of their car being dismantled, broken, not paid for. There's no repercussions for it. Unnecessary. A lot of these times there's no arrest made. And when there is an arrest, it's oftentimes dismissed when it goes to court because it's petty cases. I recently, in the past 3 months, been pulled over twice by CPD for once, or the last time it was for being too close to the fire hydrant. I wasn't in the yellow, I wasn't on the fire hydrant, there was nothing illegal happening. They pulled up to me, guns out, drawn, looking in my car, pulled out, trying to pull out to see if there was people in my car. There was nobody. I was released, but my life was in danger. Time before that, I was arrested on false pretenses. They was trying to take me to do page. There was they say I was a victim of identity theft, but we all know that was just, you fit the description. I did 36 hours in the county jail away from my family, and eventually they dismissed the case. How many times are we gonna watch our Black and brown children arrested for things they have not done, for petty cases such as restrictions on the tail light, expiration of registration? These things are not criminal, and people shouldn't be labeled criminal for these petty things. I encourage the CCPSA to take action and take control of the situation.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Omar Dakers. I am the victims advocate for Rogers Park in Uptown on the north side of Chicago. Under the CP4P model, I work for One Northside. The man who just left the stand, I also work for him under the same model and the same program. I was in the car with him on his last stop. They came up to the car, guns out, asking me questions. I was the passenger. I don't know if you saw me walk down the steps. I need a lot of help because I am what you would call disabled, but it doesn't stop me from doing my job. The point that I'm trying to make here is that for me to have this job that you see me carry better than I do, better than anybody else in the city who has my job, is I was put under 17 weeks of extreme training to teach me about traumas and all the different kinds of traumas. Now, I'm not up here to give you stats on who was shot, when, where, how, and when, and why. I'm here to tell you that the police should be under the same scrutiny, should be under the same training, and should be taught the same practices that we were taught to do the job that we have to do. They came up to the car with their guns out. Now, that police officer could have been having a bad day, and my 3 children would have had no father just because of a traffic stop where I wasn't even the pilot of the vehicle. I'm not here to waste time, and I'm not gonna wait till you tell me to stop the clock. But if he came up and had a bad day, my clock would have been stopped. Stop potential stops, please.
Our last 2 speakers are Krista Noel and Dion McGill. Pick 15 random names. Go ahead, Krista.
Good evening, everybody. Hey, how y'all doing? Okay. Go on ahead and pass the stuff they talk about because it sounds really simple. But I want you to notice that the people who are Black who spoke about actually getting stopped didn't say nothing about those three things when they got stopped. Okay. They talk about gun pointing. They talked about being snatched out of cars. They talked about things that these three little things that they want you to do ain't got nothing to do with. You do not know what's going on during these traffic stops by passing that stuff they talking about. So just pass it so it's over, okay? And then we'll get down to the nitty gritty of going into the community and actually talking to Black people who are stopped and not white allies who are telling you what's happening based on stats, okay? You need to know what's happening during these traffic stops because there is your change, okay? Your change is not in stats. Your change is in voice, knowing what exactly happens so that you can change the behavior of the police officers that are doing this, okay? One of them in particular, I don't know how many times you all have come and sat in the federal court with judge over the consent decree. But one of my guys had his CCL, right? His FOID. They stopped him over the sticker and they arrested him. An arbitrary arrest, pretextual my butt, arbitrary arrest. These guys want to arrest people. That is part of traffic stops, arrest. They ain't talking about arrest. So just pass that real quick so we can get down to business.
Hello, my name is Gary Lewis. I am one of them such cases as I was going home and I was pulled over for no more than driving a nice vehicle and what the police officer stated in a not so nice neighborhood. I sued the city and I was awarded a settlement, but more importantly, Chuck Gowdy did a story in February the 21st, and it was called Search Switch. And it was the answer to Stop and Frisk. Chuck Gowdy came over to my house and did an interview. I was pulled over just doors from my house. And I was in a car with just me and my dog. And the officer was coming up a one-way street. So I pulled over and he went down to the stop sign and he bust a U-turn and he came to the side of me and he stated that my license plates didn't come back to anything. I was driving a loaner vehicle because my vehicle was at Hinsdale Land Rover and I was in a Land Rover Defender, which is kind of flashy. And I knew that that was fabricated because I am in a loaner vehicle. And long story short, I was in prison. I was in a police station for 2 days. And COPA confirmed that the license plate did come back. They was coming to my door telling me false stories. And I had a seizure while in custody. So I'm one of them horror stories. And I had just lost my mother to death. Prior to getting pulled over and basically taken into the police station. So you can look up my story, Stop Switch by Gary Lewis, CPD. Chuck Gowdy did it.
Juwan, let Dion go and then I'm gonna let you close.
Dion McGill, District Counselor, 7th Police District. I want to thank everyone who got us here, all the people who did the hard work, the coalition. You guys are amazing. Everyone spoke has been so eloquent. I don't even want to even try to talk about some of the things they talked about. So it gives me a great opportunity to talk about a little bit of a higher umbrella issue. Like this is just a tip of the iceberg, right? What we have in this city is a trust problem. And this is the tip of that iceberg, that like the district councils are supposed to build trust between the community and the police, build relationships. So then I go to people and I go, you have to take that leap of faith, of trust. But then I'll see a news article that says on top of the countless traffic stops that we all see each and every day in the community, there's 200,000 unreported ones that are occurring, right? That have like not been put on the books. So how am I supposed to tell people to trust when they're being lied to every day? And I like to use just like absolute terms. Those are lies. So I go to the community, I go, well, you have to trust the police, right? Is that what I'm supposed to tell them? That doesn't make any sense to me. So if these pretextual traffic stops continue, it erodes everything, right? I was reading a research just the other day that a traffic stop can actually stop someone from voting. Is there any coincidence that the communities that have some of the highest traffic stops also have some of the lowest voter turnout in the city? No, that's not a coincidence, right? And we don't even think that deep, but we have to at some point. And I wished to my soul Snelling was here, because I wanted to tell him eye to eye. We have a trust problem. You have the power to fix it. These people in front of us have the power to help you to fix it. But if you don't comment, you don't deny, that's not true. That's not the real, fuck all that. It's just, it's frustrating, and it does nothing to get us to where we need to go. Thank you.
For every speaker that came up here, I commend y'all for just being open. However, y'all don't even hardly realize the reality that we suffer as Black Americans here in this city. Just last night, I spent 13 hours in District 1, arrested for nothing. On July 22nd, just passed, I spent hours in the 50 West Washington building, arrested for nothing. I have 3 order protections. In July 22nd, 2020, I was jumped on by the criminals dressed up as police officers in the 24th district. Countless events that take place. I spoke with you all. I spoke with the Free to Move Coalition, and most of you all in this room possibly know who I am. From just attending these meetings and being here, sharing with you all my consistent trauma. I got our so-called allies and a host of other people in this room that will never realize that they have the freedom to move throughout life. They have the freedom to move throughout the workplace, freedom to move throughout education, freedom to move throughout business and just life, period. Whereas I'm hindered, hampered in every motion. Similar to you as you tell your story. But here it is, these moments for me are too consistent, which means they must be manufactured. And I have an organization, a Community Commission of Public Safety, to aid me. However, I'm not getting aided. Free to Move Coalition should have jumped along, but nope. And so I'm a man in the wind, just like most Black Americans here in the city of Chicago, in the wind, arguing points in which we won't get anything out of, policies which won't aid us, legislations that won't even help us. So where we stand? I'm just saying, honestly, where do we stand? I don't want to be told to sit down when I need to say something, especially when it's important, especially when it pertains to this. You all know who I am. What pretextual stops is, I guess, more important than the people.
Thank you. We've reached the end of our public comment period. I'd like to thank everyone who offered their comments tonight. Your input is valuable.
Okay, hello, everyone. Good evening. So there are actually several groups of policies on Chicago Police Department's website that are currently posted for input and comment. So I'll just read those off. The first is interactions with persons with disabilities policy suite. The comment period for that group of policies ends on September 12th. Also, we have the gang and narcotics related loitering suite of directives, as well as the police encounters and the Fourth Amendment policy suite. And the policy period for both of those last two, that's not what I meant to say, comment period, for both of those last two ends on September 9th. So if you're interested, which if you're interested in reviewing those policies and commenting on them, you can use the QR code screen. And those policies related to the police encounters and the Fourth Amendment are related to traffic stops, and the commission is reviewing those to better understand the implications of our work and the next steps on all of this. So QR code if you'd like to offer comment on those. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next order of business is going to be a panel discussion. And before I read these prepared remarks, feel like it is important to say the question that I've gotten over and over in regards to how do we get here to in this moment. Specifically, why didn't the CCPSA address this issue or take on this issue long before today? And that's a question I've gotten maybe 5 times since I've even stepped into this room. We had an interim commission. The district council members, the nominating committee, were going through their process of selecting permanent commissioners. There were a number of issues that the interim commission did address. This is an issue that is very critical. It's very important that we get it right. So rather than me and myself and Ramel Terry, who are now the only 2 people who are from the interim commission, rushing to do that, knowing that there was a chance that the nominating committee may not select us, knowing that there's a chance that Mayor Johnson may not select us, and or the nominating committee could have selected people who would have joined the commission and may have wanted to go in a different direction. I felt it inappropriate to start something and not know if we'll be able to finish it or get it right, knowing that a permanent commission was coming. We've been on record a long time ago saying that the moment that the permanent commission was established, this would be something that we would look to address. So I did want to clear that up because there was a lot of questions that I got about that when I came into this room. The ordinance creating the commission, our next order of business is a subject matter hearing on pretextual traffic stops. The ordinance creating the commission gives residents of Chicago the power to require the commission to hold a public meeting on a specific subject. If at least 2,000 residents sign petitions supporting their meeting on some subject, the commission must meet to discuss it. On July 25th, 2024, the commission received a petition with more than 2,000 signatures calling for a special meeting on pretextual traffic stops. The purpose of this special hearing is to learn about how pretextual traffic stops impact communities and public safety, and to learn from other jurisdictions that have changed their policies on police-initiated traffic stops. First, we will hear from representatives from the coalition that led the petition drive. They will summarize why they submitted the petition. The Chicago Police Department will then give a brief statement. Then presenters who have worked on or studied changes to traffic stop policy in other jurisdictions will address pretextual traffic stops, and commissioners will ask them questions. Before we begin, it's important to understand what we mean tonight when we talk about pretextual traffic stops. A pretextual traffic stop is when a police officer stops a car for violating a traffic law, like for a broken tail light or an expired license plate. But the traffic law violation isn't the primary motivation for the stop. It is a pretext. With a pretextual traffic stop, the officer's primary motivation for the stop is to find evidence that the driver has committed another crime, like they are carrying an illegal gun or have stolen property or possess illegal drugs. The Supreme Court has ruled that pretextual traffic stops are constitutional. Police can stop drivers for violations of traffic laws and use the stop to try and find evidence that the driver has committed another crime. Even though the U.S. Constitution allows pretextual traffic stops, state and local governments are permitted to pass laws, and police departments can enact policies that place guardrails around them. And over the last several years, a number of jurisdictions have passed laws or changed policies that put restrictions on traffic stops. Tonight and in the coming months, the commission will look closely at traffic stop policies and practices in Chicago and in some of these other jurisdictions. The commission first took up the issue of traffic stops at the beginning of the year during the goal-setting process. Every January, the commission sets goals for the police department, and then over the course of the year, we work to assess the progress the police department is making towards those goals. This year, with support from Superintendent Snelling, the interim commission adopted a goal to articulate a crime-fighting strategy that is rooted in constitutional policing and supported by the community. As part of this goal, the commission noted that it wanted to ensure that the superintendent addressed concerns about the potential overuse of policing tactics that disproportionately impact Black and brown people, devastate communities, and reduce community trust and police legitimacy without necessarily making communities safer. As part of this goal, Superintendent Snelling agreed to ensure that all CPD officers receive effective training on constitutional policing with a special focus on policing guidelines related to traffic stops and consent searches of vehicles. The goal also says that policing actions must be guided by well-articulated, community-informed strategy. So the commission can explore whether CPD's traffic stop policies and practices are guided by a strategy that is both clearly articulated and community informed. And the goal also says that CPD practices must be data-driven, effective, and mindful of equity. So as part of this goal evaluation, we'll be looking for evidence about whether CPD's traffic stop practices actually meet that description. The commission is also engaged in conversations with the independent monitoring team that oversees the consent decree, the Illinois Attorney General's office, and the city's law department to ensure that the topic of traffic stops remains within the commission's policy jurisdiction. Tonight, we will hear from experts who will speak about what other jurisdictions have done to address concerns about stops and about the impact those changes have made. Thank you all. Thank you to all of our presenters who volunteered to be here and provide their perspective and experience and to engage in a thoughtful discussion. We ask that everyone remain respectful throughout tonight's discussion and allow each presenter the opportunity to answer questions that are posed to them.
Good evening, everyone. The following statement is being shared under the advisement of our counsel at the City of Chicago Department of Law. The City of Chicago is currently a defendant in a class action lawsuit on the subject of traffic stops. Because of the lawsuit, there are limitations on what city officials can say tonight. This means that the lack of any city or CPD response to statements made or data presented at this hearing should not in any way be construed as the city's agreement with or acceptance of any such statements or data, and should not be construed as an admission of any wrongdoing. A representative from the Chicago Police Department will make a statement tonight, but won't be responding to questions. After tonight, we will have other opportunities to get information from CPD using the tools that the commission has by law. Additionally, Dr. Baumgartner, one of the panelists this evening, has been retained as an expert witness against the city in another pending lawsuit, and as part of his work in that matter has reviewed materials related to the class action traffic stop lawsuit and written an opinion in support of the plaintiff's case and against the city. This won't have an impact on the commission's work. Our primary focus tonight is to hear from experts from around the country and to ask them questions, and we will do just that. Going forward, we want to hear from community about solutions. Our next outreach steps include reaching out and learning from people most impacted and getting their input regarding solutions, listening to all stakeholders and other constituents to determine the most impactful approach for the City of Chicago, additional hearings on traffic stops, and working in partnership with CPD to determine the purpose and strategy for using traffic stops and to define how CPD evaluates the outcomes of their strategies.
We would now like to invite Amy Thompson and Joy Imobio of Free to Move to the podium to describe why they worked to gather signatures for the petition that led to tonight's meeting. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, commissioners and my fellow Chicagoans. Thank you all so much for being here and your commitment to this important issue. My name is Joy Imobio, and I'm joined by my colleague, Amy Thompson, and we're here today representing the Free to Move Coalition. The Free to Move Coalition is an alliance working to create a safer, more racially equitable system of traffic safety in Chicago. Please. Over the next 3 years, we've analyzed data on pretextual traffic stops that attest to the lived experiences of Chicagoans. It's clear that change is needed. Today, we want to share with you what that research shows and what our coalition thinks needs to be done to begin addressing this serious issue. Next slide, please. I want to briefly explain the types of stops that our coalition is focused on. We have data we obtained from PD documenting CPD's traffic stops for events. Any of these stops could be a pretextual traffic stop. That's when an officer uses a violation of the traffic code, typically a minor violation, as an excuse to pull someone over when their real motivation is to investigate the person for signs of criminal activity that they don't have a reasonable suspicion of. We are not talking about stops for crimes like robbery or carjacking. If an officer has reasonable suspicion or probable cause for crimes like that, they can pull over a car for that reason. So those are not the type of stops that we're talking about here. Rather, we're talking about stops made for a traffic code violation. Slide, please.
In 2015, CPD was required to limit its use of pedestrian stop and frisk. Instead, it just funneled that discriminatory practice into escalated traffic stops. From there, traffic stops increased by 700% and have stayed high ever since. Although it's been reported that stops this year have gone down by 40%, that's still too high. If you assume those numbers remain steady through the rest of the year, that's still over 350,000 stops, more than any year before 2018. So while the decrease is good, there's still a long way to go. Slide, please. In 2004 and the years thereafter, most stops were made for moving offenses. Now, however, CPD stops are focused instead on minor violations. In 2023, nearly 70% of traffic stops. CPD has said it uses traffic stops to find criminal activity and fight violence. But when you really look at the data, it shows that the strategy of using minor traffic stops as pretext to fish for criminal activity doesn't work. In 2023, just 3.7% of stops resulted in a citation. Only 2.2% resulted in an arrest. Less than 1% resulted in a recovery of illegal items like drugs or weapons. And within that, less than 0.5% resulted in finding any gun. With over 500,000 stops last year, this data shows that using traffic stops as a pretext to fish for people engaging in crime is remarkably ineffective. Slide, please. But beyond being ineffective, CPD's traffic stops practices disproportionately harm Black and Latino drivers and communities. In 2023, Black drivers were over 51% of those stopped, and yet they make up less than 29% of Chicago's population. And District 11, a district with over 96% Black or Latino residents, had 10% of the city's stops, despite being only 2.5% of the city's population. We also, sorry, slide please. We also see racial disparities in consent searches, which is what happens when an officer asks a person for their permission to search. Officers don't need to have any suspicion of criminal activity before asking for that consent. In 2023, over 95% of consent search requests were made to Black or Latino drivers. Please.
To address these problems, the Free to Move Coalition developed a three-part policy to reduce racially disparate pretextual stops. We don't have time to fully dig into those today, but we wanted to briefly mention them because the panelists you're going to hear from will be discussing some of these policy changes. First, we want to limit stops made solely for the low-level violations that are the most common pretexts. Things like recently expired registration or one broken headlight. These stops aren't keeping us safe and they're a waste of public resources. Second, we want to prevent police from being able to use the stop code, the traffic code, as an excuse to stop someone when they're really interested in is criminal activity. This will make it so police focus on actual evidence of criminal activity instead of relying on traffic offenses as excuses to fish. Finally, we want to end suspicious list consent searches during traffic stops. This will require police to have some level of criminal suspicion before asking a driver for consent to search. Next slide, please. This is such an important issue that sits at the heart of why this commission exists. This is why community members submitted over 2,400 signatures to demand this hearing. Today, we want to increase public safety by to learn more, please follow this QR code on the screen or reach out to me or Amy. I'll hand it back over to you, President Track.
Thank you. And thank you again for submitting a petition calling for a special meeting on this important topic. Now I would like to ask CPD's Chief of Constitutional
this evening. Since becoming superintendent about a year ago, Superintendent Snelling has made it very clear that a strategy to reduce crime should not solely encompass traffic stops. I want to acknowledge, additionally, Superintendent has acknowledged that oversight of our traffic stops is absolutely necessary, and that he has taken steps to show this. I want to acknowledge the discussion of traffic stops can be complicated. What we define in policy is nuanced and detailed. However, it must always be rooted in the Fourth Amendment and in constitutional policing principles. More importantly, I am here to listen this evening. Thank you for sharing your concerns during this public comment, and I look forward to hearing from the panel and the subject matter experts here today. The more we listen, the more we can learn. And the more we can learn, the stronger we can make our policies and our training. In order to ensure that we are serving you, the communities, we must have sound policies and first-rate training for officers. This is why CPD believes that traffic stops should be added to the consent decree. We believe that adding traffic stops to the consent decree provides a robust oversight process to ensure that we develop strong policies and training. Uniquely, with the addition to the consent decree, we will also be folding CCPSA to have a role in the policy development process. This is new, but we believe that it's important. We need to hear the voices of the community that CCPSA is connected to. In 2025, we'll be prioritizing Fourth Amendment training, which will include training on traffic stops. This training will include an 8-hour foundational course and an 8-hour practical scenario-based course for officers. The foundational course is in combination with the scenario-based course, is pivotal to training as it reinforces these concepts. We are developing this training in conjunction with national subject matter experts with the review of community members. We see this training as a starting point, and as new policies develop, we will have additional training. During our policy development process, we will continue to seek community input. This can be assessed through Chicago Police Department's website. As always, we hope to hear from all of you, and we hope that you all continue to share your feedback. At the end of the day, this is about culture change. We didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get out of this overnight. However, we do believe that the Chicago Police Department is taking concrete steps to go in the right direction. We ask that you walk with us in that direction. With your community voices and expertise, we can get at this together. Thank you, and I look forward to listening to everybody here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Navales. We will now move to the presenters. Presenting to us today are Dr. Frank Baumgartner, Dr. JJ Nadeo, Rory Palvino, John Choi, Charmin Leon, and Max Carter Oberstone. Due to the limited amount of time we have in this venue and scheduling constraints for our presenters, we have allotted 10 minutes per presenter for presentations and questions from the commission. This is the start of the conversation, and the presenters all have agreed to continue working with the commission as we conduct our research on this topic. We will start with Dr. Frank Baumgartner.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to try to be very brief. I wanted to agree with the chief who just spoke about the need for a culture
Dr.
change.
Frank Baumgartner holds the Richard J. Richardson Distinguished Professorship in the Department of Political Science at UNC Chapel Hill. In recent years, he has focused on studies of criminal justice issues, including the death penalty.
Thanks.
Was that him?
Yeah. Yeah, this is me. I'm sorry.
In recent years, he has focused on studies of criminal justice issues, including the death penalty, racial disparities in traffic stops outcomes, and other issues. Dr. Baumgartner, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'll be very brief, and I wanted to agree with the chief who just spoke about the need for a culture change. And one of the things I want to talk about is where did the current culture come from? I want to focus on a particular sheriff's deputy in Daytona Beach, Florida in the 1980s. His name was Bob Vogel. And Sheriff Vogel, he eventually became the elected sheriff in Volusia County, Florida, kept pulling over black and brown men on I-95 as they drove through his district in Florida. based on a hunch that these men might be drug couriers. And judges in the local courts kept throwing out these arrests based on racial profiling, saying that it was illegal. So Deputy Sheriff Vogel at the time went to the Florida traffic code and he studied it in detail. And he found over 500 legal justifications for a traffic stop. And since that day, the Pretextual Traffic Stop was born. And it has now been instructed and entered into the curriculum in police academies throughout the country. First, one has to find the legal justification to pull over the driver. Second, one can pull over the driver, but you can't pull them over without first identifying that legal justification. That's a pretextual traffic stop. It's been common practice since the 1980s. In the United States, police conduct over 20 million traffic stops every year. And as we saw in Chicago, it's over 500,000. So naturally, some small percent of those traffic stops do lead to the discovery of some bad behavior, some guns, some criminal behavior, some contraband. But it has been from the beginning understood, even by the police who conduct these stops, as a needle in the haystack fishing expedition, as was described. The crime-fighting value of these traffic stops is quite low, but there are anecdotes that confirm the value for the police. The main anecdote is Timothy McVeigh. The Oklahoma City bomber was actually arrested after bombing the Oklahoma City Federal Building by an Oklahoma State trooper in a routine traffic stop. So there is some evidence, there are occasional times when somebody who's an actual serious criminal is pulled over in a traffic stop, but that's related to the millions and millions of traffic stops that occur on a routine basis, not the effectiveness of traffic stops as a strategy. I want to mention 3 things that are lost and then 3 important considerations, and then I'll conclude my remarks. 3 things that are lost are the innocent individuals who are humiliated, frightened, and detained, creating long-lasting material harms and emotional pain from those unjustified detentions by the police. Second, that's lost are drivers who are actually driving dangerously. We need to enforce the traffic code against people who are speeding, going 80 miles an hour in a 35 zone, people who are actually putting other citizens at risk by their dangerous driving, and diverting the traffic code into the war on drugs is not a way to keep the roads safer. Third, better ways to fight crime. If the goal is to arrest people who are involved in serious criminals, we need to investigate the criminals, do some detective work, spend time investigating their activities and arrest them for some valid legal reason. Don't simply pull over 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 people, hoping that a few of them, by luck and mere chance, will be the ones will have been involved in some crime. I want to mention 3 elements of the environment that should structure any understanding of pretextual traffic stop. First is the legal environment. Sheriff Vogel had it right legally. The police do have the right to pull you over if you have an expired tag. It's illegal to have an expired tag. It would require the legislature to decriminalize that behavior and to reduce the scope of the traffic code down to some small number of violations. And I don't expect that to happen. So the legal environment is still on the side of the police, and we can't expect the United States Supreme Court to come to the aid of people who argue that they've been unjustly detained. So that's not a route that I think we can take. The political environment is a different thing. There's a crisis in almost every community in Chicago and elsewhere about trust in the police. And I would just say, from the police perspective, pulling back on pretextual traffic stop is going to have very little effect on crime, but it's going to have a great effect on community trust and community engagement with the police. I would challenge any police leader identify the top 100 arrests of which your department is most proud in the last 12 months, the top arrests that your department has made, then count how many of those arrests that are the top value arrests came from a traffic stop. If that number is low, then don't allow anyone in your department to claim that a traffic stop is a quote unquote effective tool in reducing crime, because they may not be. And then finally, I would mention the institutional environment, the legal environment, the political environment, and finally, the institutional environment. To enhance public safety on the roads, to reduce injurious or deadly traffic accidents, perhaps we should assign traffic safety to an agency that does not have the authority to arrest people. Perhaps there should be an agency that's totally focused on traffic safety and reducing accidents. The police would naturally oppose this because the creation of the automobile was a fantastic improvement in the authority of police agencies throughout the United States. But it would allow the police to focus on fighting crime rather than in being involved in needle in the haystack strategies to pull over hundreds of thousands of people every year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We want to move to commissioner questions, and I know Commissioner Gottlieb had a question for you.
Yes. So, Dr. Baumgartner, thank you so much for taking the time today. I know you've done a lot of work on Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I was wondering if you could speak to the experience there that they've had originally with traffic stop reform and then rolling it back.
Certainly. The city of Fayetteville, North Carolina is a very racially diverse city, and there were quite significant controversies in the city about allegations of racial profiling by the police, similar to what we're talking about here. This led to allegations by the local NAACP, challenges by the city council, the city manager. Finally, the police chief left and the city manager was fired. I believe it was quite a big shakeup. They brought in a new police chief who was committed to reforming the way that his police department interacted with citizens. And that new police chief brought in a policy that he was able to convince his officers to adopt as with a pretty strong consensus that this might be an effective strategy. So there was buy-in by the police leadership, and they stopped doing pretextual stops. He told them to stop doing equipment stops, tag stops. And what happened in Fayetteville is that crime continued to decline as it had been declining, but that community calls to 911 increased as a rate compared to the crime rate. So people seem to be more trusting of the police and more willing to call them into their neighborhoods when they thought that they were being fairer.
Thank you. I have a quick follow-up question, and that is, how much of this do you believe is and I heard you mention that Chief Navales talked about culture. How much of this is a policy change, and how much is a cultural shift, and how much can policy influence culture?
Well, I would point out that at the same time that Fayetteville's police chief and the leaders of that department enthusiastically adopted a reform, in another city in North Carolina, the reform was forced on the department against its will, and it totally backfired. They mandated that consent searches had to get a written signature by the driver, which drivers typically would not consent to. But they had such an increase in probable cause searches that there was a net increase in overall searches. And I think that was because the police leaders, from the chief on down, refused to participate in that culture shift. They disagreed with the policies that were mandated on them by the city council. So it really requires institutional buy-in by the police. And it requires a culture shift. And I think some hard questions for police leaders to challenge their own training The training in the police community is that this is an effective strategy. The evidence suggests it may not be. So that's a hard question for people.
Hello, hi. Thank you for your time this evening. I have a question actually just based on what you just said. So, and I heard you say this, I believe, in your introductory remarks, that the evidence suggests it may not be an effective strategy. And I'm going to tie that to your Timothy McVeigh example. When in the jurisdictions you've worked with or studied, do you have any data? I understand the subjective characterization that the Timothy McVeigh examples, or the examples where we are getting guns and we are seeing contraband or illegal activity, are subjectively a small percentage. Do you have the data on that? And then a related question is, when you were working, or your experience of any work with communities on the concern about that subjectivity. So if you get 5 guns off the street out of 100,000 stops, sure, you could say that's a small number, but I'm sure to the life that's saved from those 5 guns, they might not see it as small. So do you know how that conversation, if at all had, was navigated in jurisdictions that made this change?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's important to understand. You might get 5 guns out of 100,000 traffic stops, or whatever the number is, some low percentage. So we have to understand the difference between a percentage and a number. It's nice to remove whatever number of illegal guns that might be used in crime from a community. That could make us safer. But there's 2 things to balance with that. There's 99,995 people who got pulled over who were innocent for each of those 5 guns that got removed. So what happened to those 99,000 people, and what is their trust level in the police after they were subjected to a policy that singled them out with no suspicion, only because of their appearance or a stereotype of their demographic profile? So I think that's a very important thing. And the other is just community trust in the police. And would the police be able to spend their time better on something else? Could they have gotten 50 guns out of the community if they had reallocated all the time and money and cars and equipment and officer time that went into those 100,000 traffic stops that generated 5 guns? I would like to think that they could spend their time better. But that's a question for police leaders. I'm not an expert on that, but certainly we have to understand the low payoff per
Thank you, Dr.
traffic
Baumgartner.
stops.
I don't mean to cut you off. We do have to get to our next presenter. I really appreciate your insight. Next, we will hear from Dr. JJ Nadeo and Rory Povino from the Justice Innovation Lab. Dr. Nadeo is an economist with the Center for Economic Studies at the U.S. Census Bureau and a researcher at the Justice Innovation Lab, an economist and data analyst at Free Our Vote. Rory Povino is the Director of Analytics at the Justice Innovation Lab, where he leads a team of data engineers, analysts, and outside researchers in designing data-driven solutions for a more equitable, effective, and fair justice system. JJ and Rory, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So JJ and I worked together to examine when the city of St. Paul changed their policy to no longer conduct non-public safety stops. I'm going to go over this really quickly because we've already heard a lot about what this was. But in the case of St. Paul, what they were the conduct that they were stopping was stopping stops for minor vehicle violations that they determined were non-public safety stops. And so I just want to highlight, and this was highlighted earlier, that non-public safety stops does not necessarily mean that they are pretextual stops, although anecdotal evidence suggests that most pretextual stops are non-public safety stops. Next slide. And so we've actually already heard a lot about this as well as to why do police tend to conduct non-public safety stops. The general reasoning is that they improve road safety. So there's a reason that those things that are violations are there, and they are for safety of vehicles. And then they also increase the probability that the police will find contraband that may be used in a more serious crime. So generally that's thought to be guns, drugs, other weapons. And so being able to conduct these stops may increase the probability of finding those items and then removing them from the neighborhood. There's obvious costs to this. So enforcement is uneven by race and income, as you've heard tonight and as you'll hear more about. It decreases trust in law enforcement in communities where trust is crucial for solving other crimes. The fees and costs of fixing minor vehicle violations cause significant financial distress upon the communities that they are affected by. And so they can lead to a cycle of poverty. And there is officer and motorist safety risks to conducting traffic stops in general. And so people have spoken about those. Turn it over to JJ.
Cool. Yeah, I'll jump in. Thanks for having me. So this figure is just showing you the number of stops per month, so the average number of stops per month in vehicle violation stops. So the light blue, the dark blue is moving violations, and then there's a small orange sliver that says other stops or uncategorized stops. And this really is just to show you, right around that red dotted line, September 2021, when the policy in St. Paul or in Ramsey County took place, that for St. Paul Police Department, right, vehicle violations basically disappeared. So this was just sort of showing you visually that policy. Can you go to the next slide, please? So what kind of our job and what we were tasked with doing is getting the best guess at like what impact this policy had. So just comparing before and after means can right sort of lead you astray in a lot of ways, which I won't spend too much time getting into. But our job or our first stab at this was to try to forecast into the future what we thought the outcomes that I'll talk about would have been if this policy didn't take place. So we basically take all of the data before the policy happens, and we try to use it to forecast into the future. So think of it like a weather forecast. Hopefully we do better than that. This is showing you just for vehicle violation stops what our forecast. So that's the sort of the black dots with the gray sort of measure of uncertainty would have been if the policy hadn't taken place. And then the sort of red hollow dots after the policy show you sort of the average of what actually happened. Okay, next slide. So this is just taking what I just showed you and sort of putting it into a succinct sort of panel. And so you can see that top left, this is the percentage change in our forecast so this is going to be the percentage change in what we forecasted versus what actually happened. So you can see vehicle violation stops, almost 100% decrease. Moving violation stops, interestingly, don't really change or decrease a little bit in the beginning, and then over time increase to sort of replace the vehicle violation stops. And then we have sort of outcomes of interest. So this is citizen calls for service, so 911 calls for service, gun seizures, reported criminal incidents by SPPD, and then traffic incidents. And what you can see there is that for none of these, you see a very statistically significant increase or decrease that is sustained. And so this is sort of our main takeaway is, well, you see 100% decrease in traffic stops or vehicle violations, and you don't really see a corresponding increase in things that measure crime, or also decreases in gun seizures, which we've talked a lot about already. I should also point out, that the gun seizures per month is around 43, and that compared to that 1,500 to 2,000 mark of number of stops, it is a small percentage of time that guns are being seized. So that's important to sort of note. Very, very quickly here, because I don't have much time, sort of recapping what I've just said. We eliminated of all stops for vehicle violations. There's no rebound that we observed. There's no sustained increase in crime or traffic incidents or real decrease in gun seizures. And then something that's been touched on, the change in stops for vehicle violations was much greater for Black motorists than white motorists. And this change was larger during the daytime than at night. So I will end there because I think we're all out of time. But thank you.
Thank you. We'll begin with a question from Commissioner Minor.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I just have a question a little bit to understand better about the trends that you kind of just walked us through. So can you talk to us a little bit more about what kinds of, so since you all had created this ban for traffic violations, what strategies were law enforcement using to continue to engage and make sure that they are seizing these guns? Where were they finding them? Also, I wanted to know a little bit more about just like, how did you arrive to a total ban? And also, what are the other enforcement mechanisms for road safety in the state?
I think I'm probably not qualified to. I'm sort of like the nerd looking at the numbers, telling you, giving you estimates. But I know John Choi's on this call, and he can probably speak much more eloquently about that. Yeah, I'll sort of leave it there. I don't want to waste time, coming up with reasons why I think maybe the policy was implemented, and leave it up to the experts.
Great. So thanks so much for your presentation. You presented a lot of numbers, so I just want to kind of try to present the takeaways that I understand them and sort of make sure that I'm right. I'm a social scientist too, so I understand kind of your caution with some of the numbers. So my understanding is that basically what you found is that stops decreased a lot in a way that like quite statistically significant and it's extremely unlikely to not be a true effect, but that you found really no evidence that it impacted crime rates at all or gun seizures at all. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And we this wasn't the only set of analysis that we did. So I can direct you to a lengthy paper with a lot of appendices, trying to really tease out if this was a true sort of null effect or if it was just by chance. So yeah, I think you're understanding that correctly.
Thank you.
Any more commissioner questions? Thank you. Next we will hear from John Choi from the Ramsey County, Minnesota District Attorney's Office. John Choi is a state and national leader in progressive justice reform, working with public officials and impacted communities to reimagine justice and the role of prosecutors. Most recently, John worked with the county law enforcement leaders to reduce reliance on non-public safety traffic stops. John, thank you for joining us.
Good evening, and thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of your special commission hearing today on non-public safety traffic stops. For the people who are in law enforcement that are listening and in the room, I want to tell you that I used to be a prosecutor that used to believe that these types of traffic stops actually could make a difference around public safety because and it was legal. And I have evolved by looking and studying research and data. There's so much research and data out there. And also, most importantly, listening to my community, especially the aspect of our community that has been most impacted by crime and victimization, and listening to their perspective. And they are asking for this change. And so in Ramsey County, we made this, it was over a long period of time in terms of a conversation that I had with my police chiefs. But I came to this realization that I was perpetuating an unjust police practice by opening my front door to say, bring those cases in. And and to make it into an analogy, I mean, I don't think anywhere on any basketball team would we ever allow for a player who only shoots 2% of their shots that go in and not think about all those missed shots and continue to perpetuate playing that particular player over and over again. In fact, we would probably tell that person that we need to make a change and move to something different. And so these are the conversations that I had with my law enforcement leaders in Ramsey County. Ramsey County is home to St. Paul and its surrounding suburbs. We have 9 police agencies. We're a population of about 540,000 people. And we made the change to, with these conversations, I said that I wanted to have my policy saying that I'm not, if there's a case that emanates or stems from a non-public safety traffic stop, that the general rule will be that we are not going to prosecute that case, as well as having a general rule that I don't want to have cases sent to me based solely on a consent search without some articulable suspicion. If you go to the next slide. And luckily for me, there was, and this is the definition of what we have as a non-public safety traffic stop. And then the next slide, please. And I was lucky that we had partners in all of this. My largest police agency, St. Paul Police Department, and then the Roseville Police Department and the Maplewood Police Department are my two largest suburban agencies, as well as St. Anthony Village Police Department. And we made this change together. So in Roseville, they actually enacted a written policy. In St. Paul, they did an email directing their police to prioritize moving violations, the things that really matter to public safety, like speeding, careless driving, impaired driving. And Maplewood did the same in terms of guidance to their police officers. And so we did this together, which I think is really critical. And if we go to the next slide, and you heard some of the results, but we were also very intentional. We said that, we said when we announced this in September of 2021, we'd like to see more emphasis on moving violations, the public safety stops that actually matter. We would like to see these non-public safety traffic stops dramatically reduced, and also to intentionally address the racial disparity. We knew going into this work that Black motorists were 4 times more likely to be subject to a non-public safety traffic stop and 9 times more likely to be subject to a search. And so we leaned in and specifically said, and I think this is how we build trust and legitimacy of our criminal legal system, as well as in policing, that we are listening to our communities and we're actually taking action, and we are actually trying to affect the racial disparities that we have in our systems. And we also knew that just because there's so much research and data out there, you'll see Frank Baumgartner's research out there, but people have researches to no end for the past 20 years. And what they have found is that this practice is ineffective. It recovers very small amounts of guns. And we knew that this would have a no discernible impact on crime rates. And that's what the Justice Innovation Lab, the 2 researchers that you just heard from, JJ and Rory, talk about. And so those are the results that we've had. If we go to the next slide. And we also said that we need to have an alternative. And that alternative was to partner with a foundation in our community, and Lights On, which is a partnership that grew out of Minnesota in the wake of the killing of Philando Castile. And at that time, Lights On was an organization that distributed coupons or vouchers to police agencies so that they could hand them out and help people with financial assistance to get their brake light fixed or whatever that might be. We expanded that partnership so that instead of pulling people over, what we do now is we can put into our CAD system the information of what the equipment violation was, a missing tab or left rear brake light out or whatever it might be. That information is sent to our 911 center. And then that information the next day is sent to our police departments, and then they will generate a letter. And then that letter will instruct them that if they need assistance to fix this defect, first of all, that they have to fix it. And then secondly, that if they need assistance, that we have funding available to do that. And we've had hundreds of people that have called, and the response has just been wonderful. We also help people with their license tab expirations and get themselves good in the system. And the positive feedback that all of the police departments who have participated in this has been just enormous. And I think when we do this, when we build trust and we build relationships, we build out alternatives. And we built out this alternative because we were working also and listening to the police perspective, and also listening to that perspective. If there's a law in the books that says that you need to have tabs, well, then we need to probably figure out a way to build out this alternative. And thanks to the foundation, we were able to do that. But I think when you do these things, when you actually put intentional leadership at the forefront and make decisions and make these changes, we can make a difference. And I think you'll see improved homicide clearance rates and improved clearance rates on non-fatal shootings. And
Can
so
you hear
here's
me?
some of the results on the alternatives.
Thank you. We'll now move to questions from commissioners, beginning with Commissioner Terry.
Thank you to all the presenters first and foremost, and thank you, Mr. Choi. My question is rooted in was this just a departmental policy, or were there other factors put in place to address this decrease? Like, was the county or the state involved with changing certain rules, or was this just a departmental policy that passed? And if you could be more specific about what that entailed.
I think this is all about collective impact. When we all decide to pull in the same direction, we can make a lot of change. So I, as a prosecutor, had my own prosecution policy. 4 of the police agencies of my 9 had some sort of directive or guidance or a policy to de-emphasize these stops. We brought the foundation, our community foundation, to the table, built out an alternative, and we got everybody pulling in that same direction. And ultimately, I think someone talked about this issue about, we had policies, but also too, we had the will and the culture change there, because culture will eat policy for lunch any day. And I think it's so important for the leaders in law enforcement to really lean in if they want to see these changes happen.
Any other commissioner questions? Yeah. Wortham, Minor, and Preston.
Okay. Hi, good evening. Thank you again for your time. And I'm not sure if I misheard you, and I don't want to misquote you. When you were explaining how it started in your office, did I hear you say that you decided the general rule would be you would not prosecute cases if they came in on what I think you described as like the non-public safety stops? So what we're talking about, stops for municipal code violations. So my question to you is twofold. One, was that a bright line rule? Understanding prosecutors always have prosecutorial discretion, right? Like that's part of your job. So did you make a bright line rule in the office that you would never, or did you look at the evidence and then decide on a case by case basis, generally that you would not prosecute? And as a related note, I'll just ask mine really quickly together. I understand where you were going with the basketball analogy, but realistically, we're not talking about basketball, right? We're talking specifically when we talk about recovery of guns, even if it's a very small amount. One gun, as you know, can cause, mass devastation for many, many families. And so how did you square that conversation in working with community and law enforcement as you enacted your policies? And thank you again.
So my policy is very specific to cases that emanate or stem from a non-public safety traffic stop. So it could be a gun case, it could be a contraband, right? Drugs, guns, or whatever it might be. Now, we do have a public safety exception, and we've been very transparent with that. So we've had like 20-some cases that have been presented that implicated this policy from one of the non-participating agencies. And in 16 of those cases, out of the, I think, 22 or 24, we declined to prosecute. Also, too, with regard to, true, we're talking about guns, but I really think the key to reducing gun violence is actually solving crimes. And I don't know what your clearance rate is in Chicago, but like in many big cities, it's not probably very good for non-fatal shootings. We should be paying attention to that. If we can't solve those crimes, the shooters who want to kill other people will continue to do that. If we can't solve homicides, that will continue as well. And so I think putting more emphasis actually on the investigations, things that matter, I think, to our public safety, and also traffic enforcement matters too. But let's focus on DWI. Let's focus on people who are driving carelessly. Since the pandemic, I feel like people are driving much more recklessly these days, and speeding in neighborhoods where there are children present. Those are the things that I think the public wants. And that's where we have scarce resources, very scarce resources in law enforcement and in prosecution. So we should focus on the things that really matter. And again, let's solve crimes.
We need to move on to our next question. Sorry to cut you off.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I have to start with a brief anecdote because the Lights On program
lit me up with excitement. So when we first began having these conversations about pretextual traffic stops, I talked about my best friend. I'm a commuter. My best friend loves to drop me off, and she was just moving back to the city from Oklahoma. And I often joke that her tints are so dark that it's always night inside of her car. And in Oklahoma, you don't have to, you can have dark tints. She's legally compliant, but since she moved to Chicago, she's no longer legally compliant, but she doesn't have the funds to lighten up her tints. So I love the innovation that comes from this Lights On program that will replace traffic tickets with repair vouchers. Can you talk to me a little bit more about how did you create a sustainable funding stream for this program? And can you also talk a little bit about like stakeholder negotiations and what was the path to creating partnership with various law enforcement agencies with this program as well?
So the St. Paul, Minnesota Foundation really stepped up very big, and I helped raise some of the money, but we created a Ramsey County Public Safety Traffic Stop fund, which to this day, we raised about $150,000 at the very beginning, and to this day, it still funds many of those vouchers. So working, I think, with the foundation community, it also buys in, I think, a broader set of people to be involved in this initiative. And community foundations are, I think, a good place to go to, and maybe the public entities there in Chicago have some resources to devote to this. And I think there's a public purpose there. I also think that it's really important that we are thinking about this as to kind of building a coalition, and this coalition has to include the police. There has to be allies within police leadership. It seems to me like the police leadership in Chicago with Chief or Commissioner Snelling wants to move in this direction. So building relationship with him. To be honest with you, this conversation with my police chiefs occurred over a 2-year period. And I will also tell you that there have been so many, the most tragic things in my community resulted because of some aspect of the pretextual traffic stop. Philando Castile in my jurisdiction, who was killed, was pulled over because of a mistaken belief that somehow this type of policing would make all of us safer. And we also had George Floyd across the river and Dante Wright. And I think those experiences help us recognize what is really important, and that we can address not only the safety of motorists, but also the safety of police officers as well. And so it's a long conversation, but I think we have to just keep at it and recognize that we need everybody at the table and providing grace to each other as well. Sometimes we show up in rooms and we think that we have all the right answers. And the truth is we all don't. We need to listen better to one another, but ultimately have a goal of wanting to have a better version of public safety and actually better outcomes. So look at those crime statistics that you have around clearance rates and improve them.
Thank you, Mr. Choi. Kelly Presley, one of the commissioners, also an attorney, and I was hoping that you could explain a little bit about the significance of a prosecutor saying, "Do not bring me this, I will not prosecute that," and how you were able to make that general rule and maintain a relationship with the police department.
Well, I think historically we have police leadership in St. Paul and in Ramsey County that is really committed to listening to our aspect of community that has been probably the most impacted by crime. And so there's, I think, that opportunity there to recognize that addressing racial disparities and listening to the perspectives of those who have been most policed need to have a voice at the table. And so I think that was already present. But again, a big part of this is just talking and building out relationships. I mean, quite frankly, this was the most controversial thing that I have done in my long tenure as the elected county attorney here in St. Paul, Minnesota. But it would have been even more controversial had I not been able to bring along some of the police leaders and agency. We also have to recognize how hard this is for our police leaders. It takes a tremendous amount of courage, because everybody in policing has been raised to believe that anything that wouldn't use this type of strategy is heresy. And there is this strong culture within these organizations, and our leaders need, I think, support to try to help them be the leaders that they need to be. And it's just not easy. But I commend my police chiefs who made this hard decision and went to the roll call trainings and explained why they were doing this. And their message was very simple, that we need to focus on things that really matter to our public safety. And this type of policing has not worked. Our community is asking for a change, and we're going to lean into it and monitor the results. And we also said out loud, we won't do this if this has negative impacts to our public safety. But the research that we had the Justice Innovation Lab proves that I think there was absolutely no impact. In fact, you could argue that those non-participating agencies in my jurisdiction, they actually had an increase in crime. So, you know, I think there's just, if we focus on the data and the research and pulling together, building relationships, keeping everybody together, we can do.
Investigator in the office. Before she speaks, I'll also remind commissioners that we have a timeline to be out of this building. So we can please be brief in your question. Thank you. Still with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. Okay, I will stick to my written statement then. Good evening, and thank you for having me. I'd like to take my allotted time to speak from my perspective as a former patrol officer and certified instructor for the City of Cleveland Division of Police here in Ohio. I'm currently with the Center for Policing Equity, also known as CPE. CPE has worked with dozens of law enforcement agencies across the country who seek our assistance to improve their data collection practices, because they know that data can help them pinpoint the core issues driving inequity and assess the effectiveness of their policies and practices. We have a number of publications available regarding traffic safety on our website, and I will put that link in the chat. During my time on patrol, which was in Cleveland's 4th District, one of the ways officers were considered productive was in connection with the amount of citations they generated. That practice leaves fewer officers available to answer calls for service. Additionally, it increases the time off radio as they're spending more time in court, which was oftentimes a point of contention for those left to pick up on more calls. We weren't connecting the dots that we were over-policing economically depressed communities and causing more harm to a greater number of people, most of whom were not involved in criminal activities. Causing that type of distress in our residents served to undermine our legitimacy and cooperation with solving more serious crimes. Officers need direction when going out for this shift. Too much discretion without goals or objectives from shift bosses is not intelligence-led policing or smart policing, which is the trajectory of this profession. Cleveland is under a consent decree, and the DOJ cited a lack of close and effective supervision as part of our problem. We need supervisors taking a close look at what their officers are doing, where they're doing it, and why, and determine whether or not it aligns with your deployment strategies and departmental goals. If your officers cannot speak to what those things are, that is problematic and increases the risk of officers going on ineffective fishing expeditions, which a lot of the speakers today have spoken to. When we frame these measures as handcuffing our officers, we are doing a grave disservice to our residents and officers alike. Avoidable use of force incidents and other officer injuries justify a pivot in our approach to public safety. You also want to look at whether or not your officers are issuing non-moving violations at a higher rate in economically depressed areas than your more affluent areas. We train officers on dispensing procedural justice to our citizens, and this has to be measured and monitored. If the justification for those types of stops is that it's in a high crime area, you have to look at the hit rates for those stops. It seemed intuitive that you would make more stops in high crime areas to discover crimes, but you have to collect and analyze your data to confirm or dispel that theory. Other jurisdictions have implemented constraints on low-level stops and did not see an increase in crime, but rather a decrease in racial disparities and traffic crashes. As mentioned earlier and was in my speaking points, Fayetteville, North Carolina, deprioritized non-safety stops and saw racial disparities decline by 21% and traffic fatalities drop by 28%. Legislators can also assist in these efforts by allowing grace periods for motorists to update registrations. If they are looking to collect fines for expired tags and fees for registrations, they can take on those administrative tasks themselves with mailed alerts and relieve patrol officers of that duty that takes them away from addressing more serious crimes. Finally, CPE's data brief on racial disparities in use of force at traffic stops published new data from other jurisdictions as well nationwide, finding that Black drivers are not only stopped for non-safety violations more often than white drivers and searched once stopped, but these stops are more likely to end in force than safety-related stops. This underscores the real risk that non-safety stops carry for Black drivers. Ultimately, you cannot manage what you do not measure, and if you are not collecting and analyzing your data, what information are you using to manage your workforce? Look at your numbers, look at your hit rates, look at your enforcement practices across neighborhoods. Look at crashes and the specific moving violations that are tied to those crashes. More tickets do not equate to more safety. These practices help to elevate, changing those practices helps to elevate the profession and reduce the harm we do not want to inflict on communities. We can do this better and more equitably. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll begin with a question from Commissioner Presley.
Thank you so much for being here. I really want to focus on the equity piece of what you had to talk about. Can you talk a little bit more about the significance? Can you talk a little bit more about the significance of pulling pretextual traffic stops and what are identified as high crime areas relative to areas that are not identified as high crime and the risk that that may place on those neighborhoods that aren't identified as high crime?
Sure. So you said, so your question is say that again, the importance of it or the relevance?
The significance to the areas that are not identified as high crime, or the risk associated with ignoring such areas and focusing heavily on other areas.
Well, that's what you would like the deployment strategies within departments to define, right? What are our goals? What are we seeking to, again, Dr. Choi talked about building cases, right? Doing more, how did he put it? Oh no, that was Baumgartner. Do some detective work, right? Build a case for the stops. If you're in a high crime area, if you patrol in that area, you get to know who the players are, right? The majority of crimes are committed by a small number of people. We know who those folks are. So just randomly pulling people over for minor infractions, again, look at your hit rates. The Freedom Move presentation earlier, when they showed the low percentage of confiscation of drugs or weapons, you have to look at that and balance it on with the harm that is done, especially the economic harm that we are causing in economically depressed communities. Things that can change the trajectory of a family with $400, $300, $750 fines, right? And it doesn't map onto safety. And that's what these different jurisdictions are finding. when they are constraining those and deprioritizing them. If they're still on the books, sure, they're a legal reason to stop. But is that part of what your departmental goals? Is that part of your departmental goals, just to stop anyone who has any kind of violation and burden them with this kind of economic burden? I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to our last speaker, who is Max Carter Oberstone. He's an attorney specializing in appellate litigation and served as commissioner on the San Francisco Police Commission, which recently passed a traffic stop reform policy. In 2021, Max was an Org Justice Fellow at the Policing Project at NYU Law School, a nonprofit think tank focused on police reform and democratic accountability. There, he drafted model legislation on a range of policing-related topics. He also designed and implemented the Policing Project's Fourth Amendment impact litigation strategies. Max, thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. Delighted to be here. I realize I'm batting cleanup, so I will not repeat anything that others have already spoken to, or at least try my best. Really just want to maybe focus on two aspects around the passage of our pretext policy here in San Francisco. And just by way of background, our policy just became effective last month. It enjoyed broad support, including support by the chief of police, every commissioner who at one point or another voted for it, and hundreds of community organizations, including San Francisco's leading traffic and pedestrian safety organizations. So the two things that I might just focus on are the process by which we received public input during the drafting process, and the way that we used data here in San Francisco. So around the public input process, we probably had the most robust public feedback process that the commission has ever had in its century-long existence. And this was important because, allowing for public participation, I think, adds to the legitimacy of any policy when people are heard and can actively participate. But we actually also just received a lot of really valuable feedback that ultimately made its way into the final policy that was adopted. And so I really recommend to any jurisdiction that undertakes a policy like this to think about how to hear and solicit feedback from the public. So a few different prongs of our process were working groups. So this was a convening of about 20 or so individuals who were all subject matter experts. So we had a lot of people from law enforcement, a lot of folks from the legal community, non-legal community organizations, traffic safety experts, etc. We went over the policy line by line over the course of 4 meetings. Every single recommendation that was made by anyone in that room was compiled and made public on our website. We also had a series of town hall events, a dozen or so, all across the city, that were kind of scheduled after 5 o'clock, where folks could come after work and learn about the policy and provide their feedback. Folks could come either in person or appear by Zoom. And there was also an online survey that folks could fill out and provide their views on the policy and related traffic issues. We also did town halls specifically for line level officers in which command staff were not invited, so that officers could feel free to give their unbridled views on the policy. And we received a lot of excellent and unbridled feedback during those sessions. We also did something that may not sound like a big deal, but is pretty radical in San Francisco, which is at the very outset, we published a rough draft of the policy so that everyone involved could have something concrete to respond to. Typically, our policymaking process can be a little bit opaque and the public only finds out about it at the very end. And that what this allowed is we just received public comment via email. Every single comment that we got was posted in real time to our website so that folks could see what others were saying about the policy. And then we also invited a series of expert guest speakers to come to our commission meetings, not unlike the hearing that you all are holding tonight, so that we could receive their wisdom and guidance. The second piece that I wanted to touch on is how we used our local data here. I think one of the big reasons jurisdictions have implemented policies like this is because they want to do data-driven and evidence-based policing. So it's critical that any stops you're de-emphasizing, it's supported by the data, that they actually don't lead to arrests or discovery of contraband at a high rate. And so we were able to get that data and make sure everything that we're de-emphasizing in San Francisco, you see arrest rates at a tiny fraction of a %. And we also worked with our local traffic agency to overlay traffic data on top of that. So every single stop that we're de-emphasizing has resulted in 0 deaths, 0 injuries, and 0 crashes on our roadway. And that really ensures that you really limit any potential downside that you could see as a result of a policy like this, so that there should be no kind of negative public safety implications associated with it. I see I'm at my 1-minute warning. I will stop there, and I welcome any questions from the commission.
In terms of, we know that these don't help with crime, but have you seen?
Excuse me, I'm so sorry to cut you off, but my audio just came back on, so I wasn't able to hear anything that you said before this point. I apologize.
No worries. So I'll try to make it quick. So I want to know about the policies that you all had to pass to make the work that you all were doing successful, whether that was just, again, departmental, was it municipal, what have you. The other piece I wanted to know is, we know that these things aren't yielding what we say the addressing crime issues. What has there been a decrease in crime in San Francisco as you implore these things, and what led to that they did not have to use the traffic stops, and what has been the response from community?
Sure. So I'll answer your second question first. We don't know yet what the results are because the policy just went into effect about a month ago. So we won't have data on outcomes probably until the last quarter of this calendar year. In terms of your first question, how is the policy implemented? So a couple of things on that. The way our policy works, or I should just say, let me just back up. In San Francisco, the police commission has pretty much plenary authority over police policy. So it was done in writing, not like an email or other more informal directives that we've heard about tonight. The policy calls out 9 categories of low-level traffic infractions, which are de-emphasized. It also restricts the usage of consent searches and investigatory questions. I think it's really critical to have a policy in writing that is binding. A big reason that you have pretext stops is because we, as a general matter, give officers in the field so much discretion in how they do their job. And in this particular context, that broad discretion is not yielding public safety results. And so I think you do need something in writing. It's optimal, at least, to have something in writing. And it's also just out of fairness to the officers to give them and the public clear notice about what's allowed and what's not allowed, because I don't think it's fair to, after the fact, after a stop's been made, that may have been in a gray area, just kind of second guess what the officer did after the fact. I think just saying upfront, here's what's allowed, here's what's not allowed, and everyone is really clear about that at the outset. I think that's the optimal way to do this.
Your question.
I just want to know excuse me. I just want to know in the policy, do you outline any kind of clear consequences for officers if they were to engage with a traffic stop with the outline de-emphasized infraction?
Yes, so with all of the commission's policies, officers are subject to discipline if they violate the policy. So that could be anything from an oral reprimand, a written reprimand, all the way up to unpaid days of suspension and even termination. And we have a separate document that governs kind of the range of penalties that could be applicable given the nature of a violation, and has to do with also kind of whether the officer has committed violations in the past and other factors like that. But yeah, so the main and immediate consequence would be discipline.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from commissioners? With that, I would like to thank all of our panelists for their diligence and presentations and for joining us today. Before I read the closing statement, or any commissioners that would like to make any comments before I read the last statement and adjourn the meeting? Okay, I have something to say, so I guess I'll close. One, just wanted to thank you all for being here today. Thank you to Impact for Equity, the Free to Move Coalition, all of the folks who are part of that, for submitting those petitions and getting the ball rolling on having this hearing. Thank you to our panelists. This was very informative for me as far as us trying to figure out how do we move forward in a way that is productive. And also just wanted to lift up the human aspect of this. I think the only person who I remember saying it in public comment was Councilor McGill, where he talked about our job is to build trust and what some of this stuff can do to erode trust. I personally am a person who have been struggling with this issue, particularly in a sense of as a person who, one, is charged with oversight, but two, who frequently gets pulled over. And I think it was mentioned a few times, and I did want to comment on it, that it's not just an inconvenience when you get pulled over. The process and that you go through, that I go through, I'll speak for myself, as a person who's been pulled over 4 times and since April of this year. It's not just, an inconvenience for me in the hopes that somebody finds a gun. Every time I get pulled over, I go through a whole process of trying to figure out how to make myself smaller, how to make myself less threatening, I should say. And, I've said this multiple times before, I firmly believe that there are really good police officers, and I've met a lot of them since being a part of this commission. But prior to that, my only interaction with police officers were either being stopped on the street or being stopped in the car. So that was the perception that I had of the police department. I never got a chance to meet people like Angel Navales or other folks who I truly in my heart believe had my best interests, but that was my gateway into understanding what policing was. It was being pulled over and not getting a ticket and not understanding what that is. So I did want to lift up the comments that he made, and then I'll close with, I would like to also thank all members of the public who came out today to lend their voices to this process. And we look forward to working with Chicagoans to get this right. You have received a lot of information tonight, and the commission is interested in hearing the public's thoughts and reflections. As you can see here, there's a QR code behind me. Please scan that code and provide your feedback on the information shared in tonight's meeting. Also, as always, you can submit your feedback at Community Commission public comment at cityofchicago.org. We'll keep you all informed as the commission moves forward with its work in addressing traffic stops. Thank you all. And with that, the special meeting of the CCPSA is now adjourned.
Thank you.